Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. In this series of videos, I'm going to be reviewing the book entitled 30 Years a Watchtower Slave, The Confessions of a Converted Jehovah's Witness. It was written by William J. Schnell back in 1956. So I believe this has to be one of the first ex-Jehovah's Witnesses books that were written. And I'm going to warn you who are atheists or that no longer believe in Christianity. This book does have a lot of Christian overtones in it, but if you can get past that and just look at the information that's being presented, then I think that you'll find it very informative to see how the Watchtower got its beginnings, where it went from a religion to a business, because we can see many of the things today and actually get to see how they had their beginnings. So I really enjoyed this book. I hope you do. I will be reading small portions of it, but for the most part, I'm just going to give my thoughts and opinions about the book. So chapter 1 is entitled, It Appeared So Harmless. And the first subheading is called of the Father. And in this section, he goes on to say how in July of 1917, when he was 12 years old, he was called by the Father while attending a Sunday school class at his local Lutheran church. So that means that he was born in 1905. And at this time, he began his journey into Christianity. He started devouring the Gospels that are in the New Testament, and this began his lifelong journey into Christianity and putting his salvation into Jesus Christ. The second section is entitled Raised to Fall, and he goes on to say that he's of a generation of men who grew up in Europe during the First World War and who had all stability and peace of mind destroyed for them long before they matured and became adults. So he grew up during the First World War era, and many of his young ones fell into despair. Some became atheists, some became fanatics, militant revisionists, revolters, and so on and so forth. But it was his faith and his Christianity that helped him to get through these troubled times. He goes on to say that many of his generation became pawns used by forces which eventually led them either into communism, atheism, or Nazism. I eventually fell victim to an even greater ism and became its loyal slave for about 30 years of my life, namely the Watchtower religion. Astutely, as I will show conclusively in my story, the Watchtower Society utilized the unsettled times and conditions of that uneasy period from 1919 to 1938 in order to fashion a new world society, which they hope will last 1,000 years. So we already see a pattern of Jehovah's Witnesses using unsettled times, and even today we see that they prey on people who are unstable, who are going through emotionally hard times, because they say that those types of people will be more receptive to the truth. And so this isn't something new, as mentioned back in the 50s by this man. That's in the 20s, the witnesses or the Bible students back then were doing some of the same things. The third section in this chapter is entitled Stranded by War. And he begins by telling us that he was born in Jersey City, New Jersey in 1905. And that's when he was 9 years old in the spring of 1914, May to be exact. His family took a trip to their homeland, Germany. And then the war broke out. And his parents tried desperately to get back to the United States, but that didn't happen. So, being in Germany, his father was enlisted to the war as a soldier, and he relates some of the goings on, what happened in the war in that area, and what things his father had went through as well. I won't go into some of the battles that he speaks of and where the armies were going and so forth. Excuse me. But his father did face, of course, it's war. He faced life-threatening situations, but even his father at the time was able to use his faith, his Christianity, to help him get through these tough times, and no doubt that helped the author as well. Being a young teenager with his father out to war certainly was not an easy time for him. And so he goes on to relate his family life during that time while his father was away at war. And there were, of course, some pretty tough things that he encountered. And so that's about it. I won't go into too much detail on that part of the book. The fourth section in this chapter is entitled, I Become Involved. So after the war was over, they found themselves in the city of Berlin, Germany. And one day they were visited by a Bible student. Of course, they left them some books and they started reading them. And not long after that, they looked up these Bible students and began to associate with them. They previously didn't have any affiliations, and the Berlin Bible Student Ecclesia, they found a good measure of brotherly love and happiness in associating with them. He goes on to say that these Bible students were a far cry, their meetings were a far cry from the present meetings that the Jehovah's Witnesses have at the Kingdom Halls. They were an independent body of Christians, and they selected their own elders. Today, everything is controlled by the headquarters in New York City of the United States, and they, up until recently, picked all elders and circuit overseers and district overseers. And now, recently, they changed that to where circuit overseer can appoint elders and ministerial servants in the congregations. But back to the book. So those who came to these Christian meetings were not only concerned with each other's spiritual warfare, but arrangements were made to visit the sick and the needy, and funds were provided by the ecclesia to lend help when needed. It brings out that these meetings were filling a void in his life and his father's life. They were a spiritual blessing to them. And we even see that today. The meetings provide a social outlet for ones. When someone first begins attending meetings, they are love bombed. Everyone is encouraged many times in publications to reach out to new faces at the Kingdom Hall, because Jehovah's Witnesses can easily identify another witness and someone who's not a witness. So that's what they did to the author and his father. I'm pretty sure they gave them the attention that they were needing and craving, and that's what the witnesses do today. He also brought out that they would feed and clothe those in need. They would take care of their physical needs first, and then afterwards they would try and minister to them. Really, isn't that how Jesus Christ did things in the Bible? Didn't he feed and clothe people first and then try to teach them something? The fifth and last section in this chapter is entitled, I Become Active. He goes on to relate that the Bible students spend much time telling other people about their faith. And that's no different today. And so, growing up in that kind of an environment, he soon began doing what everyone else was doing. Between 1921 and 1924, he was able to continue his education, but every afternoon he would spend 2 hours from 3 to 5 p.m. going from house to house and preaching. It mentions that he became highly successful in doing so, and that during these years that he was able to baptize 17 different people. That's pretty amazing. I don't think I've ever baptized one single person in the 20 years I was baptized, but he was able to do that. He mentions that this was all done, the preaching work was done by the Berlin Ecclesia in those years by inner compulsion, not by organizational compulsion as now practiced by the theocratically minded Jehovah's Witnesses. Really, I kind of think that it's all peer pressure no matter what. If everyone is doing it around you, guess what? You're probably going to be doing it as well. But he goes on to say that, however, such were not, that there were people who didn't feel the same way. They didn't think it was necessary to go preaching, going door to door. But they weren't pressured into preaching. If they didn't want to do that, they didn't want to do that. They were allowed to continue fellowshipping with those in the ecclesia, and those in the church would try to help them see the importance of that. So again, I think that goes back to the peer pressure. Even though it's not a requirement, there is some sort of peer pressure to go about doing that. Even in those periods, I know the author tries to say that there wasn't any pressure put on, but when you're around people that do that, there's automatically pressure to fall in line. And then he goes on to end this chapter in this section by saying that in November of 1921, he symbolized his life and became baptized. He ends it with this paragraph: "Let no one misinterpret this chapter as an evaluation or approval of the doctrinal tenets of the Bible students. I am only trying to explain what it was that drew me to them. This is necessary to describe how and why I became involved in and finally enslaved to one of the world's most dictatorial and autocratic systems." So that will end chapter 1. Please stay tuned for chapter 2. Thank you for taking time to watch and listen to this presentation. Post your comments, like and share this video, subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned for the next chapter.